Hello everybody and welcome to the public Kirklees Schools Forum. This I think is our third meeting now. It's a 1 hour scheduled meeting and we usually finish within that time, there or thereabouts. Certainly don't expect to go over the hour. So without further ado, I'm going to get straight into the agenda now. And do we have any apologies for absence? I'm not aware of any. Natalie, are you aware of any apologies for absence?
Yes, we've got Rebecca Smith, Julia Arigica, Laura Flynn and Kath Duffy.
Okay, thank you for that. Quick couple of introductions. We've got joining us Chris Jessup, who this is my first time meeting Chris, so welcome Chris. He's got the lofty role of Head of Outcomes for Kirklees, Head of Educational Outcomes, and we really do welcome him and look forward to working with Chris over the coming months and years. And we also welcome Peter Bell. Thank you, Peter, for joining us. He is our new clerk to this schools forum. We say goodbye to David Gearing, who left us some weeks ago now, and somehow David managed to lead on most of the agenda items as well as take the minutes. We didn't think that was fair or reasonable given the circumstances. So without further ado, I'm going to get straight into the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 5th of March, and we're just checking for accuracy as well as any matters arising. So I'm just going to do page by page and check on both. So if anybody wants to raise any incorrections or matters arising, I've just got one that I've spotted when we get up to that relevant point. So page 1, any comments? Page 2 up to 5 and 6. Probably Peter for the next set of minutes if we just have page numbering in the bottom right hand corner. Then we moved on to the high needs budget, item 6. No comments there from anybody. Okay, we'll move on to item 7 then. The COVID implications. What we've got instead, we haven't got it as an item today, but we will pick up any COVID matters as an AOB. I should have mentioned that a little bit earlier. So there will be an AOB on COVID impacts if anybody wants to raise anything for the minutes or record there. So page 4, I think I'm on now, which is the DSG. We've got DSG on the agenda again today. And we move over page to AOB, which was the consultation launched on the sparsity funding fact. It was all connected to schools out in the sticks that might lose out as a result of a change in the way this funding factor is calculated. I'm guessing there's no further update on that. Are you aware of anything, Natalie, on that, or David? No?
Not at this stage, no.
Okay. All right, we'll look for further information. I imagine that consultation is now closed, so no doubt information will come back. But as ever, we always pay due consideration for anything that might affect particularly our smaller schools where funding is obviously extremely tight. So thank you for that. There are no other matters or notes coming from anybody that I can see in relation to the minutes, so we'll move on. We've dealt with matters arising, and do we have Kelsey? Kelsey's ready. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Kelsey. We're going to move you straight up the agenda. So hide needs, those of you who are looking at the agenda, was down under point 5, third one down. We're going to move that now and hand straight over to Kelsey Clark-Davis. Thanks, Kelsey.
Thanks so much, Darren. Can I just confirm that you guys can see my screen?
Yes.
I'm just going to start that. Bear with me. Right, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. So I just want to give you some updates really about what's happening in the world of high needs and inclusion generally across Kirklees. I've been here for about 4 months now. It's been a very steep learning curve, trying to get a sense of, the priorities really. And I just want to give you an overview really, because there's a huge amount of development work going on currently. This visual here just gives you a little bit of an overview of all the different things that have been going on, and I guess I've been certainly seeing my role as bringing these together to create that overarching strategy of what happens in what order, addressing our most current priorities, along with that longer term strategy around inclusion and Vsend across Kirklees. I want to kind of just remind colleagues that we've created what we're calling our inclusive ambitions across Kirklees. And this is before I started, but I understand that a range of stakeholders from across the authority, from partners in health, in social care, from our parents and carers, from CAIAS, from as well as schools, were all invited to come up with what are our ambitions for children and young people in Kirklees. And we developed 7 inclusive ambitions, which we have summarised in this slide here, which I'm sure there's nobody here would dispute anything that's written there. But these inclusive ambitions are kind of what's overarching and underpinning everything that we're doing. So coming out of those, colleagues may recall that my predecessor, Ronnie Hartley, had put together a 10-point plan around Vsend, which many of those actions had been started. Things had begun, but obviously we've had a change in landscape with the pandemic over that time. So we've refreshed and renewed that. And again, we've come together. It's been really great actually, because this transformation plan has come across all areas within the local authority. We've had input from a range of stakeholders, but this has also it's a real corporate priority. I've sat in a room with Mel Meggs, with Tom Brailsford, with Jo Sanders, my line manager, and other key professionals across the local authority, really thinking, where do we start and how do we draw together different teams and different actions across Vsend. So we are at the point of, it's still at draft form, but we are almost ready to share this widely. Sitting underneath these headlines are action plans, basically, or in the school world, what we call our strategic development plans. So they're, you can see the different areas here of these key activities. Each of these have action plans underpinning each one. So some of the things that, just to give you some of those headlines, we're talking about really trying to expand and develop our outreach and inclusion partners to be able to get out into mainstream schools. We know that at the minute, much of the high needs budget is focused at the other end of the continuum. So our real complex children with complex needs often need an educating outside of our authority. And there's a real ambition to want to have earlier intervention, supporting our mainstream schools in terms of building capacity, developing capacity, as well as then we also are aware there's an absolute priority in terms of provision. So getting that continuum of provision right from mainstream all the way to the out of area provision. So that sufficiency plan is really clear as well. So that will be from developing capacity in mainstream to we will be creating more specialist provision across the local authority. We are also working really closely with our special schools at the moment to look at, because our special schools are currently full, we are looking at increasing places in our special schools, but in the shorter term, creating some outreach work from our special schools into mainstream and satellite provision coming out of our special schools. So, hopefully you can see that together there's a number of different things happening that overarching together will create real transformation around Vsend, working closely with partners across social care, across health, looking at real holistic systemic change. This is being governed and overseen through the Vsend Transformation and Commissioning Group, which we have representation again from key stakeholders, including schools, on this group. This is where we'll be accountable. This is where we'll be reporting our updates and our progress too. This group meets monthly. It's chaired by Tom Brailsford, and I know that we do have a number of heads from both primary, secondary and special sitting on this group, as well as AP. The key updates, some things that we've had some really positive feedback from our schools are 2 of the initiatives that have gone out very recently through one called the Inclusion Support Offer, one called the Value and Send Tool. The Inclusion Support Offer is a new service that we launched in March, and it's a bit like a front door service for schools. It's when schools or SENCOs are feeling really stuck about a case and not knowing where to go. It's a phone line, it's a telephone service where we've got 2 members of staff working Monday to Friday, sort of 8:30 till 4:30, and our SENCOs have started to use it. We've got some feedback there in terms of how people have found it so far. I sat on SENCO Network the other day and we had 2 or 3 SENCOs talking about just how brilliant this service had been. And apart from anything, we know what it's like in school. Sometimes the pace is sometimes you can't see the woods for the trees, and what this service is offering is an opportunity to help SENCOs to think and problem solve, and also signpost sometimes to services and support that maybe schools aren't always au fait with. So this is in its infancy, but we're early feedback is incredibly positive. The idea of this again is about focusing support at an earlier stage within the high need system, so getting in there earlier and trying to earlier identify need and get things right earlier down that continuum. Additionally, many of you will have heard of the Vsend assessment tool, which has been implemented piloted in our BBest hub. So again, we've had feedback from schools around that, a range of feedback. Some of it is about things that we need to improve to get this right, to get it better, but also some really positive feedback. And we again heard from Senkos recently who are utilising this about the impact it's having. Again, it's a holistic tool, so it really helps you to think about the needs of children and young people and check that we're meeting those needs and getting them right. I know I'm talking really super quickly, so if anybody does want to come in with questions at any point, that's absolutely fine. In addition to that, you will be aware of a number of reviews, working parties that have been undertaken recently across the local authority. So the work around alternative and specialist provision, the pandemic has certainly played its part in terms of the pace that's been able to be completed, but it's almost ready for publication. And just to reassure colleagues, what we're really interested in are the actions, is the next steps, and we have already started implementing some of the actions that came out of early drafts of that, but we want to ensure that we're being really transparent and sharing with colleagues what those are. I mean, I've already talked about there will be more specialist provision. One of the other key actions that's come out from the alternative provision review is the need for the local authority to create a post of who really oversees and has that strategic leadership around alternative provision. So there are plans in place to create that substantive post in the short term. At the moment, we've got a partner with us under a short-term contract, Matt Brayford. Some of you may have worked with Matt previously, and Matt's been asked to start undertaking that piece of work in the short term until we're able to recruit substantively. Also, you'll be aware, I've touched on already, around special school placement sufficiency at both, that whole continuum all the way through. We are looking at the moment around that. There is an imminent cabinet report due to come looking at increase in places in some of our special schools and potential new builds as well, and that will be in the public arena very soon too. We're mindful that it takes some time to build schools and to create spaces, so we are also looking in the short term at what we can do, certainly looking at spaces that are available across the local authority in some of our schools, and as I've already alluded to, working closely with our partners in our special schools about what we can do in the meantime through creating satellite provisions. Our educational safeguarding service is another team that we've been looking at. This is the team that look at things like elective home education, children missing education, our attendance, our school safeguarding team. That team's going to be having a bit of a relaunch, a bit of a revamp, a bit of a rebranding, not a huge amount of change, but fitting in with potentially looking at a more place-based approach. So just thinking about the community hubs that are in place and looking at the new family hubs that we've been talking about how we're working across the local authority in locations, thinking about how some of those services like school safeguarding and attendance can be closer linked to communities and to locations. And the other bit that schools may be aware of, just a bit of an update, we've had a working party looking at data around exclusions. This was driven jointly through the local authority and Ethos. And we've got a cracking data dashboard that's about ready to be shared. I know we've been just looking at data sharing agreements, some really useful data around exclusions that will help us then to plan the what next. I'm a bit of I love a bit of data, but I'm always kind of, and so what we're going to do with this? What are the next steps? So again, coming from that, looking at the whole inclusion offer really, about how do we reduce exclusions, keep kids in schools. I've just hopped over from another meeting, which was an SEMH conference, which is taking place today, jointly through the LA and Ethos Academy Trust. Some fabulous speakers and really inspirational stuff within that this morning, and many of your schools involved. We've had 80-odd people on the call this morning, Senkos, including leads, pastoral leads from schools, and some really juicy stuff happening around SEMH, which is great to see. You will be aware that I know it's been discussed at School Forum, and David G was able to give us a real update before he went, that this was agreed back in April in terms of the an uplift for mainstream schools around children and young people with EHCPs. At the recent Senko network meeting, some Senkos were still coming back with a bit of confusion around that, and I don't know if that just hasn't filtered down to Senkos, but we're going to be sending out some reiterated comms around that for schools. I know some stuff did go out back in April at the time, but just in terms of what's happened, what the amounts are, this is just phase 1, and there is also a phase 2 around that as well. And the next step will also be around looking at our funding formulas for our special schools as well. And then last bit of update is just some other bits of work that are really exciting that are going on that I wanted you all to be aware of on Schools Forum. One is a piece of work that's been co-produced with a group of Senkos from across mainstream schools, just looking at the graduated approach generally and looking at best practice inclusion in schools. You know, what's almost our non-negotiables, what's our expectations, what does outstanding inclusion look like in schools? And we've created a document and an audit tool, and there's going to be some training materials that are going to be rolled out to schools starting from the autumn term. It starts off with a general offer for your universal quality first teaching. What is the ordinary available offer for everybody? So there'll be training for whole staff. So we'll be putting a plea out to heads to ensure that we've got a twilight slot at some point in the autumn term for your Senkos to roll this out. Leading on from that, there'll be the more targeted work. So what do you do for children with social, emotional, mental health needs? What do we do for children with autism, ADHD, etc.? So that's a really interesting piece of work that's going on. So again, about kind of getting it right across the board. And the other bit that we're really aware of, and I just wanted to kind of flag up, is where our SENDAC team are at the moment. We've had lots of communication recently from schools, some positive, but lots of not so positive around our SENDAC team. Some of the challenges that schools are experiencing in communicating with our SENDAC team. I wanted to just give that update to say we're absolutely aware. I think it's fair to be really transparent and honest and say our SENDAC team are kind of at a crisis point at the moment. There's been a bit of a perfect storm with lots of additional factors that have come into play, and I think the churn in leadership in my position hasn't perhaps helped with that in terms of some of the changes and pressures that have happened, and consequently we've had a few people voting with their feet in terms of that team. So a huge amount of mobility. We've got in excess of 70% of our staff at the moment are either very new or agency staff, but just to reassure you, there is a real plan in place around immediate recovery as well as that longer term strategy, reviewing our processes and pathways. We've got a real ambition about creating a much more person-centred approach and looking at those pathways to get it better, as well as a review of that team and looking at roles and responsibilities, and there'll be a recruitment drive, real training, induction going forward with a not a hope, an absolute assurance that things will improve going forward, because certainly I won't be resting until we get that right. So I'm mindful that that's been a real whistle-stop tour, and I've given loads of information there. If any colleagues on the call would like to ask any questions or would like to, come in at that point, I'm more than happy.
All right, yeah, it's great to hear, by the way, really full report there, and thanks for the update. It's particularly interesting to me to hear about the provision side and seeing different routes and pathways for kids in Kirklees, kept in Kirklees, not going out of area. I know that was a real thrust of Ronnie Hartley's work and under Joanne and so on, and it's good to see and hear that work's continuing. So thank you for that update, Kelsey. Has anyone else got any comments or any points they want to make? Usual hand up if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question. Going, gone. Right, thank you very much, Kelsey, for that update, and sounds like you've got to dash off now to another meeting, so thank you for your time on that one.
No problems, thank you.
Cheers. Okay, without further ado, we'll move on to item 5, dedicated schools grant outturn, and I should have welcomed David Baxter as well. This is his inaugural public forum meeting. He's got some really big shoes to fill, so no pressure, David. The dedicated schools grant, over to you.
Thank you, Darren. Yes, incredibly big shoes at the moment. Yeah, the dedicated schools grant, as I didn't circulate as part of the pack that I sent out to yourselves. I didn't circulate something on the DSG account just because I suppose I was looking at how we present that information and what we do with that going forward. That will come out in due course, and I'll make sure that there's further information forwarded to yourselves as it's completed effectively, and we report it through the final accounts. Just really to just highlight and probably build on really elements that Kelsey broadly alluded to. The high needs budget, we're looking at a significant variance on the high needs part of the dedicated school grant, looking at £10.5 million adverse position for this year. Obviously, it's well-known position in terms of the funding position, the caps on the funding for the organisation for Kirklees Council and how that's worked through, but that results in a £10.5 million deficit position for the year. That then sort of filters through into the reserve position for the council, where we're looking overall at a £25 million deficit in the reserve account. And that's, again, the brought forward position on the high needs was £12.8 million with another £11 million added to this financial year. So we're looking around £23 million in a deficit position for the high needs account, so a reserve overall. The rest of the accounts, broadly speaking, the early years slight underspend, the schools block slight underspend, and a couple of pressures around central services and a PPP issue and the Alnbury Community School deficit. So overall, the accounts are about £10 million adverse, but as I say, the majority of that is linked to the high needs position across the council. So very much the focus of all our attention at the moment in terms of how the funding's gone through and how it's filtered through yourselves in terms of school forums in recent history. So that's where broadly the count is. Is there anything particular that anyone would like to pick up on the DSG account that I can perhaps assist with? Or
so it said paper to follow on the agenda, David. Is that to follow after the meeting then, so we can scrutinise those figures?
I can put the figures on the screen if you want now, Darren, or do you prefer it if you just circulate them after? Or
well, we'd normally be sort of looking at the numbers as well as having the narrative, and I was looking at my pack for where the actual paper was. So
sure.
Maybe it's worth us just seeing the numbers before we move on to the other three items on this point.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll put that on now.
Am I right in thinking we can't use other local authority monies to plug this shortfall now? It has to show as a deficit on the account, and
that's right.
We have to show how we're going to reduce this deficit, and is part of that going to be filled in with increased funding over the next few years? That's one of the things David used to or would explain to us.
Yes, sorry, yeah. Effectively, the organisation's capped in terms of the high needs funding. The government recognised that there was additional funding requirements for the organisation, but because of the capping facility, we effectively increased by approximately £1 million per year for the next, I can't remember the number of years. So we would catch up effectively. Had the cap not been in place, the high needs position would not be in this situation. It's just that there's a capping position as effectively bring our organisation to the correct funding over the next this period of time. So it's just been it's being funded through a transitional arrangements. That's what I would say at that point. And yeah, we are working through that at the moment. Again, the wider question for that is the work that's ongoing with Joanne and Mel and colleagues is talking to the SFA about potential funding in the interim period that would actually assist us with this deficit position. And again, working with regional colleagues, we're by far the highest in terms of adverse position on high needs at this particular point. So the deficit we're looking at there is £23.4 million. If you can see that on the screen, that is by far the highest in the local region from the Yorkshire and Humber side that I've been involved with discussions about the individual balances. So yes, it's pretty much, I'd say work in progress, but a high priority across the organisation. So the Director of Finance, all the directors, and working with the SFA.
And for members of the public who might be tuning in to watch this, it is a national problem as well, though, isn't it? Whilst we might be at the high end, there is a problem across the country with high needs funding that the government is well aware of, presumably due to historical underfunding, which the local authority has had to try and bridge the gap. It looks like Joanne's got a point to make.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think just for clarification, that position is a cumulative position, so it's not been just in year, but David is correct. The authority is engaging with the Educational Skills and Funding Agency, very much to look at our transformation plan as a local authority. How best do we realign funding? But also, you're absolutely right in terms of acknowledging that as a local authority under the national funding formula that's due to gain, our gains have not been, they've been incremental. So that doesn't mean to say that it's just about doing nothing. It is very much looking at the funding alongside that wider system transformation that Kelsey very kindly updated us on earlier. So it is really important, though, to acknowledge the scale of the challenge. But it's not just about waiting for the money to catch up. This is a national position, but we have to be proactive in our transformation, and this is taken very seriously. I know Forum have challenged around this for a number of years, and we are seeking to address that with some significant council funding alongside that. And I'd refer colleagues back to the cabinet reports that were taken back in March of this year. So there's been some investment from the local authority to underpin that information, and alongside some of the healthcare top-ups. So we will continue to liaise and engage with the EFSA and keep Forum updated as to that. But we are working at the moment towards a deadline to submit some further detailed information to the EFSA at the end of July. So we fully expect to brief you in September as to progress. Thank you.
Okay. Apologies for the school bell going off my end here. It should stop any second. Thanks for that. So we move on now to the maintained schools balances, excesses and deficits, David.
Yeah, just bear with me a second. I'll just clean that off, get that off the screen. Has that gone now? Right.
We
So
still have papers regarding this in the packs which are sent out.
that's right. Yeah, just bear with me a second. Excess balances.
So one of the things we've done while you're bringing that up, David, is just to anonymise the schools. We didn't think it was appropriate for Forum and the public forum to be actually detailing the named schools, but these relate to individual schools in terms of surpluses and deficits. That's correct, isn't it?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Just bear with me. Do you want to put this on the screen, Darren? Are you happy with the?
Well, we've got the papers this time, David.
Okay.
So
No worries. Yeah.
yeah, I think we can just talk through it.
Yeah. I mean, in essence. Yeah, as you say, just anonymised in terms of I put the DFE number on the schools just for reference. But overall, you've got the primary schools balances just under £8.4 million, rolling forward into 21-22. Special schools 395,000, moving again into with a total into 21-22, and then the secondary schools we're looking at just under 3 million, just over £3 million, but that includes one particular deficit that probably needs to be taken out of account. There's the £1.743 million school number 4019 that probably needs to be taken out of that because it's not technically a school anymore. It's just reported in that particular forum at the moment. So overall, the balances, yeah, we've got effectively £5 million on secondary schools, and then just under £9 million on primary and special schools rolling forward to the new financial year. So just a report of position. Yeah, and again, just any particular comments on that. And I suppose it moves on to the wider point around the excess balances and deficit balances on that. So do you want me to move on?
Well, has anybody got any questions initially? Can't see any there. So sorry. Yeah, move on if you would.
So the excess balances, again, we're just looking at individual schools. What happens is from now we write out to the individual schools, just asking what the plans are for the excess balance, because what we'd look at is there's thresholds on the budgets of 10% for primary schools and 8% for secondary schools. So what we're looking at is how those resources will be utilised and what the plans are effectively. Because I assume through challenge with forum, you will look, the reports will be brought back and then they'll be scrutinised. So that's a process that'll be happening now. So we've written out to the individual schools. So some schools, maybe on this call, however, will have had a note requesting some further information on that. Then we'll feed back to yourselves in terms of what potentially we'll be looking at next in terms of that, and presumably that will be for consideration and potential approval at a future school forum meeting. Again, nothing unusual in terms of the approach for yourselves. It's just what process needs to be brought to yourselves to challenge back, really. So that's where we're at with the individual schools on that. So I think
once a school exceeds 8 to 10% of its budget, it then becomes an excess balance. Is that have I read that correctly?
That's exactly it, Darren. Yeah. So there's 19 schools that effectively have in excess of 8 or 10%, depending on whether you're primary or a secondary school.
Right, got you.
So yeah, those notes have gone out, and then that information will come back, and that will be brought back to a future forum briefing to update yourselves.
And nobody wants it clawed back, so presumably they'll be giving us robust plans for how they're intending to spend that money and why they built up such a relatively large surplus.
Oh, yeah, I would expect so.
All right, any questions on the surpluses? Okay, moving on to deficits then, a little bit more worrying, these red numbers.
Yes, we've got nine schools currently showing a deficit on their account. Again, in some ways, the presentation of this note I've given you shows a deficit on the individual school, but some schools are looking to improve their overall position throughout the last 2 or 3 financial years. So the top one, the reference 7011, that had a deficit of nearly £500,000 in 2019, which has moved now to a position of £197,000. So you can see it's having a significant change in the overall position for that. It's on the right trajectory. It's again the interesting challenge for ourselves in finance of spotting schools where it's going the opposite direction. 2139, for example, started with a deficit of 49,000. Now it's at a deficit of £79,000 from 2019 through to 2021. So it's how the schools are working through and what the potential interventions are required, and again what potential challenges come back through schools forum to look at that particular issue. So it is a report position in terms of deficits as at 31st of March, and what we've got 9 schools, I think it said, was it at that point? Yeah, 9 schools, but some have only just gone into that position. There's 3 schools that look like they've moved from a surplus to a deficit in the last financial year. I would anticipate that all those schools have been in contact with ourselves in terms of support and maybe had historic support through intervention from the forum, from finance and various. So the things that will be ongoing, but it's what next. And I suppose for the future, we need to be aware of any other schools that may not be in a deficit yet, but the trajectory might be taken as that particular direction as well. I would anticipate most schools where this spotting potential trends around that will already have looked to highlight these issues, and we're looking for potential adjustments, looking at reviewing the budgets, and the budget processes, most of them will be completed now subject to final sign off with governors, but again those will probably be built into both the annual budget and the 2 to 3 year budgets going forward, so they would have plans for those issues. There are some unknowns depending on numbers of children coming into schools, but things are being picked up, and it's just trying to spot those, and again just drawing on the experience of the colleagues in my team and yourselves is how we intervene at that point. So that's the deficit balances that as I see them.
Thanks very much, David. I would be very surprised if some of those went down to the COVID related costs, particularly where the schools were in surplus and have now gone into deficit. I don't know the schools at all, nor should I, because it's anonymised, but 1% and 2% can't seriously be a problem. It's those 9s and 11s where you'd obviously be a lot more concerned, particularly the third school down, where it must have a small budget. If that represents 9% of this, that must be a tiny school, so probably
that's
one
right,
which needs additional support. Any questions on that from anybody? Thank you very much for that. So I wasn't sure where we put the item 4, which is Education Learning Partnership Board item. So Natalie, you've been juggled around the agenda. It's now your turn. Any updates from the ELPB?
The Education Learning Partnership Board met on the 9th of June. The items that were discussed at that meeting were around the admissions code and fair access protocol changes that are due to come into force from the 1st of September. A number of changes that are within those protocols are around improving the support for in-year admissions, and all of that documentation should have been shared now with school colleagues. We also fed back from the first of the workforce planning groups that was held mid-May, where the group agreed a number of key priorities around wellbeing for our educational workforce, around CPD for senior and middle leaders, and recruitment and retention, including early careers teachers. So they're in the process of building an action plan, and we'll feed back through relevant groups as we move forward. We had a conversation around transition arrangements and some of the challenges that schools are presented with in the current circumstances around the end of the academic year and the start of the new term and the new academic year. Talked about some of the creative solutions and options that schools were exploring to ensure that all of our children that were in those transitional periods received an appropriate transition opportunity and helped them to settle in the new academic year in their new setting. We also talked about education recovery and the Kirklees Futures strategy and piece of work that colleagues should be aware of. There's a number of groups working on that at the moment, and there is a pathway through to Cabinet for sign-off and agreement. However, it has been produced in partnership with all of our stakeholders. So the next meeting of the Education Learning Partnership Board will focus on the Kirklees Futures strategy and recovery over the next 1 to 3 years. We also received feedback from the Education Improvement Committee, who had been looking at updates around the EEF project, local offer Vsend, and looked at a number of other updates around progressing the standardisation offer and received really positive feedback about their engagement with schools. The Places Access and Inclusion Committee also met mid-May and they looked at the primary national offer headline data. Again, an overview of the SEND development work, and the school place planning document was shared for discussion, and again that has been made public now. The next meeting for the Education Learning Partnership Board is the 7th of July. Like I say, at that, the focus of that discussion will be around the Kirklees Futures strategy.
All right, Natalie, thanks for that. Any questions for Natalie on that item? Very thorough update. Thank you for that, Natalie. We move on then to schools contingency, and it's back to David.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, again, a paper has been circulated with school contingencies for 2020-21. We did cover something in one of the briefing meetings last month. I think it was May, sorry, when we actually complete, yeah, last month. Yeah, we haven't got to July yet. Yeah, again, just in overall sense, the funds for contingency were around just over £2 million, and the expenditures primarily focused around the allocation for Pupil Growth Fund, which is just under £750,000, and then we've had the issues around severance costs of just under £380,000. That's the main constituent of the input in the school contingency. Again, there's certain elements there that are recurring around tied accommodation, little elements around that, but they're the main focus of it. And business rates is another aspect where you've got some vacant school premises. The remaining funds on that was £660,000. So effectively, the £2 million budget, we just spent just under £1.4 million in 2021 on that particular contingency. Or out of that contingency, I should say.
And 660,000 is a lot of money. What? I may have asked this question before. What happens if that remains unspent, or it just won't remain unspent? It will be spent by the end of the year. Where's that money go?
It gets rolled forward, as I understand it. So it will then be picked up in the new financial year, I believe. So that's how I believe it's dealt with. So it's just part of the wider contingency. So it doesn't just disappear. It will just roll forward.
Presumably, when that budget was set, because it seems like quite a large underspend.
Yeah.
Presumably, when that budget was set, some of the things that were expected have not materialised. Because why would you end the year with such a large surplus it's almost a third of the budget, and a bit more than is it a third? Almost a third.
It is, yeah. Because in the previous years, if you're at the top of the note, it looks like we roll forward from 1920, £106,000. So yeah, it's quite significantly higher than this financial year. I don't have the full details on why that would be, but I'm guessing, much as you sort of alluded to in terms of the pressures of COVID, there may be some issues that have offset in this particular area. So I would anticipate something along those lines.
All right, that's fine. Any questions on that from anybody? None. Okay. And school reorganisation. Back to you, Dave.
Yeah. Again, total reorganisation spend for 2021 was 640,000, and that was split across primary schools 149,000 and secondary schools £493,000. Again, it presumably will work its way. It just has all been utilised because it's showing a recurrent budget of £292,000. So there's actually an overspend on that particular account, but it's being supported through the contingency of pupil growth monies. So that's probably where some of the resources being reallocated across the account. Again, I need to check my predecessor's notes on some of this, but it looks like we've got 640,000 school reorganisation budget of £292,000, and a couple of contributions from elsewhere in the account to bring it to a break-even position for the year.
Okay, and we are obviously aware of the schools that are going through that reorganisation, and
yes,
and more to come next year. Or anyway, no doubt we'll get a further update in September.
Okay.
Any other questions on that for David? Okay, well, that brings us to any other business plans for the next academic year. I know Natalie, Michelle and Michelle being the chair of the main forum, the private forum, we'll be meeting somewhere before the end of the school year with David and Natalie just to talk through the plans for next year. And are there any other comments to make on the plans for next academic year? All quiet. And forum membership, do we have any vacancies, Natalie, or are we quorate, solvent, whatever it is?
We do have one vacancy for governor representation on forum currently, so we'll be working hard over the summer to recruit a representative for our governor vacancy. I don't think we've got any other vacancies at this moment in time, and we've had nobody standing down. We will obviously do a calculation over the summer to ensure that our percentage of pupils across our makeup of schools gives us the right representation for forum, and we'll report that back in September.
Okay, and we've confirmed the minutes already. So on the date and time of the next meeting, we've got a reserve on the 9th of July. Is there anticipation that that's going to be required?
I don't think so, but I think we can agree to probably stand that one down.
Okay, so assume that's not taking place unless you receive some communication in the next few days, because it is not that far away. It's only a couple of weeks away. And now the date for next year, we will be publishing, or take it, we're going to publish those in due course. Natalie, is that following our meeting with me, you, Natalie, and Michelle and David?
It will, yes. The proposed date for the next public briefing is the 15th of October, but we will make sure appointments come out and that a full schedule comes through to colleagues.
Full schedule for the year, yeah. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the meeting, unless anybody has got any other business that hasn't already been covered. Hands up if you've got anything. Okay, then, without further ado, again, that is the end of the meeting, and I hope that you all have a great day, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.